Why do I like to drive this old truck? Well, there's a whole pile of reasons. We're gonna share some of that. Could it be, in fact, the foggy headlights that you could barely see through, the rust on the bumpers, the old classic design that is clearly out of date with all of the new modern day vehicles. This old truck even has some chrome rims with a 5-bolt pattern. You can't even barely find 5-bolt patterns anymore on pickup trucks. Yes, there's even a little bit of rust on the vehicle, but that seems to be okay, at least by me. I've even got 176,000 kilometers on the clock, and the interior looks fairly dated with lots of plastic, but at least, hey, I get a center console flip up and all cords, seats for all kinds of people. We can fit 6 people in this pickup truck, 3 in the back, 3 in the front, and it just simply works. I'm just one person in a growing trend of hundreds of thousands and even millions of people out there making a decision to drive older trucks and cars just like this one. Higher miles, a little bit of rust. Maybe it's not perfect. Maybe some of the technology is out of date. But you know what? If you get yourself a decent vehicle that has a solid reputation, you can still get thousands, hundreds of thousands of miles of great service life out of these vehicles. I mean, this vehicle here, no one's ever going to blame Dodge, Ram, Stellantis for making a quality vehicle, but this is from a generation when things were still fairly simple. Let's take a look, and this is why I like this truck. Just open it up right here. And as you'll notice, we have a pretty straightforward engine here. We have a 4.7 liter V8. This is the Magnum engine, naturally aspirated, very simple. There's your alternator, there's all kinds of extra parts, your air conditioning, your overflow tank, air filter's easy to get at, oil filter, everything is accessible. Power steering, even the battery's easy to get at. There's nothing really hidden here. This is an old school engine and an old school setup, very simple. And it's the sheer serviceability of some of these older vehicles that makes them great to own. And that's another big reason. These modern day vehicles, if you look at the brand new Rams or look at the brand new Fords, Ram's coming out with this new twin turbo straight 6. It's going to be an engine congested with technology. As well, even the outgoing Hemi. You've got the Hemi tick, it's just new enough to be a problem, and it's just old enough to want to get rid of. Ford's got their turbocharged EcoBoost engines, and even GM's had all kinds of lifter issues. But it all comes at the expense of a huge initial pay-in or buy-in cost, $80, $90, $100,000 for new trucks. Even cars, you can't even find a car under $30,000 anymore. So it's no wonder people are starting to look at older vehicles to get to and from work, to drive the kidlings around. People are making a decision, a conscious decision, to accept some of the flaws of these older vehicles. And this old Ram was good enough. This is truly a beater. With those types of miles, that year of technology, this 2003 Ram is from a generation when things were simple. And as a matter of fact, I bought this truck for $6,000. Would you believe it? $6,000. What do you get in modern day vehicles these days for $6 grand? All right, well, let's go for a drive. And I want to talk about some of the key reasons. Here, let's turn that heater down. It's kind of old school. You'll notice you've got some good old-fashioned buttons and knobs here. See, that's part of the reason I like these old vehicles. And I want to talk about some of the key reasons people are making a conscious decision to buy older vehicles. Get rid of the idea and the notion of buying a brand new truck, a brand new car. And you know what? I've driven beater vehicles many years ago. And then I decided about 5 years ago that I would buy a new vehicle. And I bought something that was quite expensive. It was close to $100,000. And even when I did that, I was able to make the payments. I was able to pay it off in a few years. But during the whole time, it just didn't feel right. It sort of went against a lot of the things I've always believed in, and that was being somewhat frugal. You know, money's hard to come by. So the idea of driving an older vehicle has always been something I've done. I've come from a background of, you know, long line of farmers, and so we always look for value. And, you know, I've always driven slightly older vehicles. The newest vehicle I ever bought was probably 5 years old before that. And honestly, there is a time when you need a new vehicle. At some point, if everybody just uses up all the old stuff, then what's left, right? So, and then at some level, you maybe don't have the resources to fix stuff and be able to wrench on it yourself. So you do need to move into something newer at some point. But I'm making a conscious decision to buy this older vehicle and own and drive these older vehicles for as long as I physically can, and many other people are. There's a lot of reasons. They're so expensive nowadays. The sheer cost of new trucks, you know, rolling over $100,000 mark just means that it just doesn't make a lot of sense for a lot of people to buy new vehicles. But there's some very specific things that I talk about when a reason why I like driving these older vehicles. The first thing is, you know, I don't need it to make any car payments. And after I realized having that car payment for a few years, I realized that I really didn't know what I signed up for. And even though the vehicle I bought was great and wonderful, I always had this guilt, and not having that car payment just feels so right. So paying $6,000 for this older truck, and I've had it now for a few years, just means that I don't have to make car payments. I can spend that money in places that I'd rather spend money on. You know, I can take more vacations, I can reinvest, because as a matter of fact, you know, as we roll in, as you can tell, I'm getting a little older. So it's kind of nice to be able to put that money away, maybe on retirement, maybe investment into a business. Some people like crypto, some people like stocks, whatever your boat is. Isn't it nice to put that money somewhere else? I mean, when you think about it, to get a new truck like this, you know, a crew cab Ram like this is going to cost you, with a small V8 engine currently, is still gonna, you know, it's a fairly base trim. You don't have a lot of features. There's no leather, there's no sunroof. It's got AC and power mirrors, or power windows and locks, but realistically, it's a pretty low spec vehicle. Equivalent would probably be about $70,000 today. So $70,000, if I didn't have a very minimum amount down, 10,000, say put down $10,000, had to borrow the rest, I'm still stuck paying $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 a month car payments over 5 years. Well, I'd much rather spend that $1,000, $1,200 somewhere else. You know, I mean, why would I want to dump $1,200, essentially the equivalent of a mortgage payment, into a truck payment? I mean, as far as I can tell, these vehicle prices have gotten absolutely ludicrous. It's gotten to the point where it's simply barely worth buying a new vehicle. And so I found this vehicle. I know the original owner, and I bought it off of them. They were moving into something, downsizing. They needed to get something simpler and wanted to buy something brand new, and they bought something very economical. So I managed to scoop in here and I bought this truck. And I bought it for a decent price, but I didn't have to make any car payments. I mean, look around nowadays. I mean, if you go 2019 and older, you could find a beater for, you know, $2,000, $3,000. Those days are done. Now a beater is $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000. I was looking at some Honda Civics the other day that were quite expensive, actually. You know, a 2012, 2013, that generation, with some of the best engines, the K engines, that, you know, they had a 1.8, you can get a manual or an auto, and they didn't even have timing belts. They're great cars, but they're holding such great value that those cars are still trading hands with 250,000 kilometers, and they're going for, people still want, you know, $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 for these things with, you know, 200,000, 300,000 kilometers on them. It's absolutely ludicrous. So that's the other part, is if you find the right vehicle, you can still get yourself a decent deal. So $5,000 to $10,000 nowadays is a beater. So I'm in beater territory here. I'm in an old truck territory. This truck's over 20 years old, and it runs like a top. Sure, I put a new set of tires on, I did brakes this fall, but the beauty is, that's the other reason why I like driving these old trucks. We already spoke of, I don't like car payments and I'd rather use that money elsewhere. But another big reason is the ease of maintenance and repairs. I mean, try to fix any of this new stuff. You've got to plug in, you've got to have all this special software and computers and diagnostic equipment and know-how and hundreds of hours of training and specialized training and access to some of this equipment that you can't even get at from the Joe Public. This vehicle I can still fix. I did my own brakes, tires, I've done some minor engine work, you know, I've done water pumps and, you know, thermostats and, you know, you name it. Like, I've done some minor work, O2 sensors I've worked on, although those are a pain, but I've done work on this vehicle and I'm not scared to wrench on it because it's a simple vehicle. You break a nut, you put a new nut on. A part is, everything on these older vehicles is pretty much bolt on. bolt off, bolt on. And that's why I love these older trucks. You could still work on them. Try getting into the engine compartment of a new Ford diesel. You have to pull the cab off the vehicle to get at it. Even these new, any of these new V8s or the Turbo 6s, they're full of hardware. Think of these EcoBoosts. There's all kinds of extra plumbing. You've got intercoolers and turbos, and the engine compartment is stacked right to the top. You've got to disassemble half of the engine compartment just to get at it. Not to mention, you know, the accessibility and maintenance and repairs are a lot easier for Joe Public like me on these older trucks. But the point is, the older trucks are a lot simpler and more reliable. And cars too. Old cars generally don't have all the technology. More old cars don't have turbos. More old cars and trucks don't have direct injection, no turbos and all of that extra hardware. They've got simpler transmissions. Everything is a simpler setup. And that means parts are cheaper. If you do have to take it in the shop, service rates are likely going to be less. And it's just an easier vehicle to own. Parts are cheaper, insurance is cheaper on these older vehicles, because if you get in a fender bender, you're likely not going to spend as much money on replacing a part or a fender or a bumper. The old bumper I showed you, it's a chrome bumper, unbolt bolt. This one here had an oops on the back. I found a used one on Auto Trader for $30. I slapped it on, I had a new bumper. Try that with the new trucks that are all painted bumpers, plastic parts. They're made to shatter and blow away, and then you have to stop spending, you know, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 on a bumper for these new vehicles. I did it for 30 bucks. So that's another major reason I love this old truck. You can bang it around, you can drive to the mall. You also don't need to worry about, you know, that first dent, that first rock chip. That's another reason people are buying the older vehicles. The new vehicles are so expensive. Parts are expensive. If you have to repaint something, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. And owning an older vehicle like this just feels to be much more sensible to own. You don't have all those concerns. You can go to the mall and not worry about it. You can go to places that are a little bit dicey and questionable, and if something does happen, the car does not cost you an arm and a leg to fix. The other thing that I actually love about these older vehicles, and this old truck specifically, is you don't have all that technology. I mean, I just showed you right here, the buttons, the knobs, everything's so simple. You know, you don't have a rotary knob like some of the new Stellantis products or Jaguar, or some of the fancy dancy Euro vehicles, and have all this technology, and buttons and knobs are still a thing in these older vehicles. You don't have to go into all these screens and these swipe away screens, capacitive screens or haptic controls. You have a simple set of knobs and buttons right there. My stereo controls, my heater controls. It's all very, very simple. The technology not only means that there's less expensive parts, but when there's less parts to fix in the first place, like instead of having this big infotainment that's 14 inches in corner to corner, and it has all these haptic controls on your steering wheel, that means there's a higher probability of failure. Yes, it's reliability. And these newer vehicles that you're finding in these $100,000 trucks are simply not that reliable. These older vehicles like this are just simply more reliable vehicles. It's straight and simple. There's not much more to talk and debate about. You get yourself one of the older, reputable brands, and they're durable, they're reliable. There's just less things to break and fail. You have less modules, less electronics, and even if this goes, it's a good old-fashioned resistor. Remember with the heater resistors, that's all you have. Heater resistor, you have this, and it's a very simple setup. You know, I don't have a sunroof in here, and a lot of older vehicles don't have all that extra technology. Sure, while leather interior is nice, sunroof's kind of fun, and it's not that they're a high failure rate point, but it's just more equipment on board. We also know, here's a big one. Here's a big one. Take this one home, and this is one that I truly do believe in. And you know, with this evolution of technology that we're seeing, you know, both from a convenience technology, you know, we get all the haptic controls, capacitive parts, and this and that, but it's also safety technology. This is from a time when I don't have backup cameras, which is a win. I don't have a lot of those other, you know, lane keep assist. I don't have a lot of the other technology that can fail, but it also means Big Brother is watching. You know, you're seeing some of these manufacturers now are incorporating this technology that's staring at your eyes. It's watching for your behavior, and it's keeping an eye on you to make sure you keep it between the lanes. It's also now reporting back to Big Papa and the headquarters that you may not be driving appropriately. These old vehicles don't log your driving behavior. These old vehicles don't watch and monitor you. These old vehicles don't try to swerve you back into lane. These old vehicles do what you're telling it to do, and it doesn't do what a computer's telling you to do. And it's funny, it's quite ironic when they use the term autonomous driving. And I get the technology. Autonomy is the idea of independence, essentially doing it self-controlled. So when they talk about autonomous driving, which I can't stand, I mean, the whole idea of like a lot of these electric vehicles nowadays, and a lot of vehicles are going to autonomous or semi-autonomous driving, meaning these vehicles are going to drive themselves or have the capacity to do so. And while that's a fun party trick, it leaves a lot to be desired in terms of failure modes. But you know what, the way I see this, I don't want the vehicle controlling me. I want to control the vehicle. And if you want to talk about true autonomy comes from my ability to autonomously drive my own vehicle. That's right. These old vehicles, these old trucks have a level of simplicity that is just breathtaking. It's wonderful. And I think more and more people are realizing that. They're tired of paying for these high vehicle prices. And while a lot of people have asked for this new technology, when it comes time to pay the piper and take the vehicle into the dealership, and then they're stuck with that $3,800 bill for that module that just failed, that controls all of that electronics, they're probably talking tongue-in-cheek to themselves and saying, you know, I probably didn't really need that level of tech. It's kind of annoying, and quite frankly, it just cost me an arm and a leg. And while not everybody likes to agree, and everybody likes all that new technology, you'd be surprised there's a growing number of people, including myself, that like to get back down to basics. Now, I'm not saying I give me a crank windows. I'm not saying, you know, sit on an egg crate carton for a seat. But, you know, I am saying that a lot of people are looking for a simpler driving, a driving experience. And I like personally to drive a vehicle I can fix myself. I'm able to wrench on it. It's not going to break down that often. And here's the thing. If an engine blows in this vehicle, I can go on down to Stellantis dealer and get myself a brand new crate engine for this vehicle for $7,000. And a weekend in the shop, I can have it transplanted myself. Or you can even get the dealer to do it 100%, $8,000, all in, new engine, labor, parts in, done deal. Okay, and this thing's good for another 300,000 kilometers. These new engines are so technical with turbocharging, direct injection. All of that tech means if you needed to put a new engine in some of these new vehicles, like an EcoBoost engine, might be a $20,000, $22,000, $25,000 engine, Canadian dollars of course. It's twice the cost or more to replace an engine in a lot of modern day vehicles. A lot of transmissions aren't what they used to be either. You know, engineers think they're smarter than everybody else, you know? And I beg to differ. I come from sort of an engineering background myself, and I know how they think. They get the ring and they think all of a sudden they know everything and they have all the answers, but that's not true. And I'll be honest, CVT, the older technology has tried and true tech, naturally aspirated V8s, V6s, 4 cylinders that are just simple, they're reliable, easy to wrench on. Transmissions, torque converter automatics, 5-speed, 6-speed, 4-speed automatics. They're reliable, they're simple. And all these engineers got to come up with these great new technologies. Like what? CVT transmissions. There's a technology that failed grossly. Those things are constantly failing. Ask Nissan how that worked out for them. DCTs. Sure, it's great in a Ferrari or a McLaren. You want to go racing, it's great. But most people aren't. And most people just want to get from A to B reliably to take their kids to school, go to work. They don't need a racing gearbox. They just want something that works reliably and is relatively fun to drive. They're making a lot of great transmissions these days. And yes, ZF 8-speed autos are one of the best. You can still find them in BMWs and Jags and Range Rovers and some of those vehicles. But that type of transmission is a dying breed, and it's harder and harder to find old school torque converter autos, and there becomes a high prevalence of hybrid drivetrains connected up between CVTs, and it just feels like there's way too much technology. Drivetrains are fragile and they're built to the hairy limits. And that's where these old vehicles are just simple. I can fix it, it's cheap, it's reliable. If I got to replace a part, I can go down to the shop, get it myself. And in the meantime, above all, I don't have to spend $1 on a car payment. You know, my $6,000 just means that I can spend that somewhere else, and I don't have to spend, you know, that $1,200 a month on a car payment. I don't have to spend that $1,800 on a truck payment. I'm free and clear. Insurance costs are lower. That means not only am I saving that $1,800 on a truck payment, I'm also saving probably another $200, the differential on insurance costs from a new truck to this old truck. So now it's more like $2,200, $2,200 a month from keeping this or buying a brand new $100,000 pickup truck. I don't know about you. I mean, we all have our places and things, and we all like our toys, and everybody can justify it. And rightfully so. We all work hard for our money, so I totally understand why a lot of people, you know, try in their own mind, say, you know what, it's worth it. I work hard and I deserve it. So I get it. It's 100% people are in their own space. All I'm saying is live within your means. And for me, my own means says, look, I would rather redirect my money in other places. I like driving this truck, and from the driver's seat, other than it doesn't have the big screen, it feels like any other truck I've driven. Sure, it doesn't have as much power. This has got the old 4.7. It barely has enough power to get out of its own way, but that's okay. If something breaks, I can fix it. It's a little thirsty, but you know, ironically, all this new technology and cylinder deactivation is another piece of tech that is destroying engines. Ask General Motors how that's working out for them. Even ask Acura how that's working out for them. So all this newer technology means it's shortening lives on some of these engines, and it's costing you, the consumer, more on the back end paying for that vehicle. And I personally think driving an older vehicle like this and an older truck is a growing trend by a lot of people who are realizing that, well, A, the cost of living crisis is burying them alive, but also, even if they have the money and are living within their means, it's really hard nowadays to justify spending $100 grand on a truck and have those payments, or even spending $50,000 on a mid-sized car that really, you're watching it depreciate out of style. And so a lot of people like you guys will ask the question, well, then buy a 3-year-old car or truck. Well, then you and I and we all know that that's traditionally where I'd go. I traditionally go with a vehicle that was 3 years old. That was the sweet spot, 5 years old. Like I said, I would typically buy 5 to 10-year-old vehicles. If we bought something older or newer, it was usually for my wife, get her in a newer vehicle, and she would be in something typically more 3 years old. But realistically, we know what's been going on in the last few years in the auto market, and late model used vehicles were going for more. I went down to a Toyota dealer the other day, and I looked at a brand new Highlander, and they had a price point was, I believe it was like 56,000 Canadian for a mid-level. That was a base. That was either the Turbo 4 with the 2.4, or you could step up for the hybrid with the 2.5 liter, and that got, you could get into that for about $58,000. So either spend that, or they took me over and showed me a used one that was 2 years old that had 65,000 kilometers on it, and they said they were asking more for that 2-year-old vehicle than they were for a brand new one. And as soon as they lost me on the word go on that one, and I walked out of the dealership, and I was pretty much disinterested immediately, and I just walked away. So what I quickly realized is late model cars are also going for premium dollars, and a lot of these dealers are playing games, in my own opinion, and pushing people away from even the slightly used vehicles. And that's why buying an older vehicle, and when I say older, start looking at the 10-year-old vehicles. Find yourself a Honda, a Toyota. You know, those are you get into that 10-year space, 15, you're still going to get a pretty good quality vehicle if it's been well looked after. And you know, I don't mind doing a little work, even if there's a few things. You got to do some ball joints and some brakes. It's a relatively small cost to pay when you consider depreciation on a new vehicle, or somewhat depreciation, or at least the payments that you're making, and of course the interest rates that are getting applied to your loan payments. Just think of those costs. So what it's going to cost you a set of $2,000 brakes or $1,000 brakes. What does that compare to your first car payment? That's $2,000 right there. I don't know. That's the way I like it. That's why I drive these older trucks and these older cars, because they're guiltless. They don't cost me a lot of money. I don't have car payments. They're easy to fix. And quite frankly, I just don't worry about it when I drive to the mall. It's just a great vehicle to own. So I hope that summarizes why, in fact, I like to drive beaters, old vehicles, old cars, trucks, you name it. And there's a lot of people making the same decision. So I hope to see each and every one on the next one. And as well as always, be sure to check out those videos. More enlightening information. Hope to see each and every one on the next one. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.